Welcome guys. So we are doing these are PHP web development tutorial. So we're discussing about the address book project, and this is a part of a series of videos. So we were discussing how to develop the website, and this is, I think, our fifth video. So if you haven't gone through other videos, please go through it. So today we're going to discuss about one more feature. Now we have already discussed view, update, add new. Now let's discuss something interesting, which is uh, uh, okay, so maybe we can do edit. So edit, we have discussed delete. The edit also is a similar feature. When you do edit, it does two things. It first, you see edit, it passes the ID 109. So edit 109, as you probably know, it comes here and it tries to find edit, and then because you're passing 109, it does a query with 109 and it gets the records, and then it builds this array, and then it passes the data to the edit view, and the edit view has the HTML stuff. So edit view is just like the way same as the last time. I have some style sheet here, but ideally I should be using blueprint all the time, uh, because you should not have, one of the things is that if you're using blueprint, you try to use it in most other places. It's not really a good idea to have some of it, the CSS on your file, and some of it is here, but people do it, and I also do it, but you should be always try to move as much CSS in a central file. Anyway, coming back to the edit, as you see here, I'm just building a form, and I have got some, this is a table, and then I'm doing a PHP echo this. So what this does is really, it gets the, when you do $name, it gets your, so when this file is invoked with a data array, and in your edit you do $name, it basically looks for the name variable within the data. Just the key thing to realize that I'm not doing something like this here, but instead of, I'm directly doing this. So that's the syntax you have to particularly remember. So I have got now two forms. One is for edit. So when you do edit, and then if you see there is a form open, and then it invokes address update. So when you submit this form after editing, it calls, so let's go back here. If you do save address, it calls, as you see, okay, what happens, it calls update, it updates the record, and then it redirects it to the view. So let's show again, test, let's change it to test1, and then it becomes test1. So what is happening is that, so from edit view you come back to address when you submit the form, and it calls this update. So updates takes the all the records which are submitted through the form. Now as you see how I'm getting the values which are posted through the form, I'm using this input post, and I'm doing an ID, and I'm doing true. What this true does is that, remember, in my first video I was talking about cross-site scripting or web form security. So this true basically takes care of anybody who's trying to mess around or passing some values, like the one which, let's see if I have, having something called delete from address, or passing typical the way the web form security is website or cross-site scripting is handled, is something they always try to pass, like single quote or comma, and etc, etc, like that. So for example, if you typically in a login password, one of the standard cross-site scripting attacks are usually happens like, so let's say you're trying to pass a password. So typically you would enter a password, like, say, if your password, let's say XYZ, then you would enter XYZ, right? But typically somebody who's trying to hack into site, he will typically enter something like, so what this query would do is that it will, when it goes to the SQL, this would translate to, if you come here, so let's say if you have a SQL something like uh, so let's write it here only. Let's say if you have SQL something like this, select star from passwords, let's say, or select star from user where password equal to this. So when someone enters XYZ, then you build the SQL like that. But now think about it, if someone enters something like this. Now let's say if you don't know the password, if you do XYZ1, so this SQL would never return anything, which is probably the right thing to do. But if somebody enters like this, so some hacker enters the string like this, or I think he'll enter like this, and if you plug this one here, as you see here how the SQL looks, select start from user where password equal to blank or blank equal to, okay, it should be like blank equal to blank. Now these SQL would always pass because this would always return true. So that means even without supplying a password, this person would be able to log in because this SQL would always return true. So anyway, so that was a little bit of cross-site scripting example. So which typically will have some single quote. So when you have true, this basically takes care of cross-site scripting. So it takes care of all the commas. So anyway, coming back to the update feature, so we get all the things which the user has entered, and then we build the array, data array, and then we run this update function, this db.update. We pass the table name and we pass the data. So what that happens is that these columns get updated. Again, this is a CodeIgniter feature call, so you should look at the db class, how CodeIgniter handles in the CodeIgniter documentation. And then anyways, after the update is done, I redirect to the view. So that's about our address. So let's go back to home and let's to add new. Now add new is, it's a similar thing in update, but one thing I have is something called the JavaScript validation. So as far as these files are concerned, you will see each of them has a validation, and this validation is performed by jQuery. So for example, if you enter email which is not a valid email, so let's say this, you get this message immediately. Now the key thing to understand is there is something called client-side validation and server-side validation. So the difference is that client-side meaning you haven't really gone to the server, it's all happening within the browser using JavaScript or jQuery. As opposed to server-side validation is that when you submit and then it goes to the server and server checks the email and then says okay, it's not a valid email, then you come back. Now there's always pros and cons of both. The good part of client-side validation is it's quick. It's a better user experience because you flag the errors to the end user immediately, and also it saves time. But other part is that sometimes you may have end user who has disabled JavaScript, and then it will not pass through the validation. But anyway, so once you enter that, you'll see the message goes away. And then if you try to click this, you get all these messages. So let me show you what's going on here. So if you see our code, it's that new add. So address new add. So that means if you come to address and you have new add. So new add, when you click there, it basically loads this view, new add underscore view. And if you click new add view, you'll see this is the HTML. Now it has uses a JavaScript validate.js, which basically is a jQuery plugin for validation, and also it has also a regular jQuery .js. And then what it has is each of these fields, it has the class required, class required. What that means is that when you use this validation, the way this works is that this validation is you first include the plugin, add a bunch of classes for each of the web form fields, and then at the end of the um, jQuery you add this part, add the form name dot validate. So within the jQuery document ready functions. So that will make all this magic happen of client side validation. Now let's look in detail. So class required meaning it will not let you enter a field without blank. So if you once you enter it starts going blank. It's the error goes away. Then you clear it, you tab it out. Again it comes back. It will not let you submit of the form without all these conditions. You see this is required email. So when you require email, that means this validation plugin, it has a validation logic which is for it checks for format of an email, which is basically have this format a@bb.com. I mean it cannot validate whether bb is a right email address or but at least it checks for this format at and then with a period. So there are other types of validations also involved. It's in a min length too. So if you have just only one, then please enter at least 2 characters. Now there are much more validation. You can also customize a lot of things in this validate, but this is sort of a basic implementation. But let's say advanced implementation is that you can also modify this message which comes. You can add your own validation logic. So that means you can email and then you can say my validation method. So you can have your own validation method and you can define it. So all these things you can do. So that is about the validation. So in terms of the way that this is structured, if you see when you first the way this works is that when you click on add new, it first goes to the new add method in address and loads a view, and then when you submit it calls, if you see method in the form, it calls address add. So that means it goes back to the controller and it invokes add method. So add method gets the values from the form and then it calls db insert with the data, just like the way we did update. So with that let me stop here as the time is up. Thank you.